This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by Fables and their first adventure, The Citadel of the Unseen Sun.
This Fables adventure is now coming to life in a physical form as 6 hardcover books, which will be crowdfunded on BackerKit.
These adventures have been written by some amazing talent in the industry, including James Hake and yours truly as contributing to it, and it is suitable for characters of 1st all the way up to 13th level, exploring the dark vampire-ruled realm of Astoya.
This series features over 500 pages of content, over 40 monsters, as well as all the maps and tokens that you need to run the adventures.
Follow the links in the description below. The hardcover books are launching at the end of November.
And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings! My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for GMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell in the corner so that you can be up to date on all of our content.
Today, we are heading over to the world of Krynn, where the new Dragonlance book has introduced a brand new sorcerer subclass for D&D 5e, the Lunar Sorcerer subclass.
The world of Krynn is surrounded by 3 moons, which empower the magic of the world, and the Lunar Sorcerer gets to draw on all 3 moons, choosing which one they want to draw power from at any given moment or on any given day. Today we're going to be looking at this new Sorcerer subclass. We're going to look at the features and talk about how we think it stacks up against the other presented subclasses that already exist for the Sorcerer, and we're also going to look at some build options and how we might play a Lunar Sorcerer.
There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
So let's start off by taking a look at the features that this subclass gets, and that starts right away with Lunar Embodiment. When you get this feature at 1st level, the big part of this feature is the expanded spell list, which is something that we've seen with newer sorcerer subclasses, but this one works a tiny bit different.
Now, with this sorcerer subclass, the spell list is divided into 3 columns. The spells associated with the full moon, the new moon, and the crescent moon. For a total of 15 spells in total, basically each column gets 1 spell of 1st through 5th level. And so the sorcerer chooses each day which phase of the moon their character is in, and they get to cast the 1st level spell from this list without expending a spell slot. Now, you might think that the phase of the moon you choose determines which 5 spells your sorcerer knows for that day. But this isn't the case. Every Lunar Sorcerer gets all 15 of these spells, of course based on what current level they are, at all times added to their spells known. So if you are a 7th level character, you're going to be getting a total of 12 additional spells known, 3 of every level from 1st to 4th level. This is even more spells known added to the sorcerer than the Aberrant Mind and the Clockwork Soul. It doubles the number of spells a Lunar Sorcerer knows over a baseline sorcerer and is even more than those other subclasses introduced. However, you can't retrain these spells, unlike the Tasha's subclasses, where you got the option to swap spells around. These are completely fixed. You can't change them. You got them.
The cool part of the feature here, since we aren't able to swap out our spells, is that we do get to cast the 1st level spell associated with the phase of the moon we're currently in for free once per day. Now, when we look at the list of spells, there are some standout options. Amongst the 1st level spells, I do like the inclusion of Shield being in here. And being able to cast Shield for free once per day is just a little bit of extra boost to your defensive capabilities. A lot of utility spells make this list, which I actually think is pretty cool because although this list isn't all of my favorite spells in Dungeons & Dragons, and really it's not even my 2nd favorite spells in Dungeons & Dragons, they are great spells that I wouldn't normally take. And having access to them and the ability to have them in my arsenal, things like Alter Self, Phantom Steed, Lesser Restoration, Dispel Magic, all really incredible options here. There is also Hold Monster, which is, in my opinion, a really great spell. So Shield and Hold Monster kind of take the top of the charts for me. Everything else in here, it's cool that you get it, but I don't think it dials the power up needlessly. I think that they're just going to turn the sorcerer into a really good utility caster.
I agree. Most of the spells on this list are situational utility spells that have rather narrow applications, but are great in the situations that they come up. Lesser Restoration and Dispel Magic are great spells to pack along in case you need them, and many sorcerers wouldn't normally waste a spell known on these spells because they don't have the broad applicability of, say, Counterspell that is pretty commonly used. At the same time, we're getting spells that aren't normally available to sorcerers like Lesser Restoration, Death Ward, and Rary's Telepathic Bond, all of which are spells that, again, are useful when they come up, but we're not really going to get in this spell list any sort of bread and butter spells that are really amazing aside from Shield, in my opinion. The necromancy spells here are especially disappointing. I think Ray of Sickness and Vampiric Touch are just not good spells, and even getting them for free, I probably would never cast them. Color Spray is fine, but it doesn't scale well. Confusion is also not good and probably something that I wouldn't use my 4th level spell slot on. Hallucinatory Terrain is very, very narrow in its applications, but is powerful when you find the right case. So in a lot of ways here, even though we're getting 15 spells, there's a couple real duds on this list, and only really Shield and Hold Monster are the standout hits.
I think what's interesting is we're talking about a lunar soul sorcerer, so we're associated with moons and moon phases and all of that. And it shocks me that they didn't include Fairy Fire and Moonbeam on this list. I'm wondering if they thought that dialed the power up too much, because those are both A-tier spells in my opinion. But Fairy Fire, probably one of my favorite first level spells in the game, and Moonbeam is a great area of effect damage spell that you can move around the battlefield. I mean, Fairy Fire, sure, that one maybe is a slightly bigger stretch, but the fact that Moonbeam, it's called Moonbeam. You're a lunar soul sorcerer, lunar moon, it's there.
It's a glaring omission.
Yeah. But either way, relatively okay spell list. 15 extra spells is nothing to be upset about, even if you're only going to cast maybe 10 of them.
I don't even think you'll cast that. I think you'll cast Shield very regularly with this character, but I think that there's a good chance that well over half the spells in this list you might never cast unless the scenario where they're perfect comes up. On the flip side, you do also get another first level feature, Moonfire, which gives you Sacred Flame as a cantrip for free. And it allows you to target 2 creatures that are within 5 feet of each other with Sacred Flame instead of 1. So you get this little extra AoE damage cantrip. It's like a free twin spell for your cantrip, but they have to be beside each other, which is good. Not complaining about that one.
No, I think that Moonfire is just an excellent improvement because already Sacred Flame is a great damage-dealing cantrip. Feels on brand for a Lunar Soul Sorcerer, and being able to hit 2 targets if they're next to each other, great. At 6th level, we move into what I think the theme of this subclass is really starting to play into, and that is the Lunar Boons. And this is going to be a thread that goes through almost all of the rest of the abilities. When you choose your lunar phase, you are going to get a discount on meta magic options used to cast spells of specific schools that are paired with that phase of the moon. You reduce the meta magic cost by 1 to a minimum of 0, and you can use this a number of times per day equal to your proficiency bonus.
So while you're in the phase of the full moon, Abjuration and Divination spells get the meta magic discount. In the new moon, Enchantment and Necromancy spells get the discount, and in the crescent moon, Illusion and Transmutation spells get the discount. Now, this is a bit of a roundabout way of saying that within the School of Magic, you're getting a couple extra sorcery points to spend on meta magic. Because you're limited to the number of times you can apply this benefit to your proficiency bonus, you're effectively getting a number of extra sorcery points equal to your proficiency bonus, but you can only use them on meta magic for a specific school of magic.
What I think is really interesting is we have left out Evocation and Conjuration from the Schools of Magic. I actually think this is probably a good balancing move, because if I was able to spam Empowered Spell on Evocation spells, I would.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the golden thing, is that if you could get free Empowered Fireballs a number of times per day equal to your proficiency bonus, this would be an amazing feature. But with that off the table, we have to consider a little bit more carefully what sort of options we're going to have. We're going to talk about specific combinations that are possible with this at the end of the video, but it does mean that you do have the possibility for damage-dealing spells that aren't Evocation or Conjuration, which there's not many, but they exist, to empower those spells for free. You can apply Subtle Spell for free to Enchantment and Illusion spells, though. That's really good. And you can get half price on Quickened Spell for any of these spells, and you could reduce the cost of Twin Spell or Heightened Spell by 1 sorcery point respectively. So, for example, if you wanted to have a twin polymorph, that would normally cost you 4 sorcery points, but if you are in the Crescent Moon phase, that's only going to cost you 3 sorcery points to twin polymorph in that way, which is not bad. It does reduce the cost, not to 0, though, in those cases.
Also at 6th level, we gain Waxing and Waning. Now with the cost of a bonus action and a sorcery point, we can easily switch our moon phase. This means that we don't have to wait till the long rest. If we want to get a free casting of shield or switch up the schools of magic that we're getting discounts on in the middle of a adventuring day, we can do that. And I actually think that that opens up this subclass in a really important way, because now you can adapt to the situation. Are you going into a social situation? Maybe you want to switch to divination magic that you can get your discounts on. Or if you're going into more combat-focused situations, maybe necromancy and enchantment's going to suit you better. And just with a single sorcery point and a bonus action, you get to switch things up.
Worth noting as a tactic, though, because it costs you a bonus action and a sorcery point to switch your phases, it's not worth doing this just to get a discount on a casting of a single spell, because you're spending that sorcery point that you would get as a discount anyways. So in reality, you're going to need to at least benefit from whatever phase you're going to switch into twice to see the benefit. And even then, if you're planning things in advance so that you don't have to switch to get the meta magic discount that you want, that's ideal. So just be aware that if you're just switching every time, you're basically negating the benefit. So make sure you stick in that phase for a little bit. Now, there are a couple other benefits that you get when you do switch phases. So as we gain levels, it might be offset that cost, because you want to say get that extra free first level spell slot casting. By higher levels of play, a free extra casting of Ray of Sickness and Color Spray aren't really worth the action unless you're truly desperate. So I don't really think that that's great, but the later features are good.
I do think that with Waxing and Waning being an additional 6th level feature, it is useful to have here, but absolutely this isn't something that you're going to spam until maybe later levels where you get to use this for some really cool features.
Yes.
Speaking of those, at 14th level, we gain Lunar Empowerment. So now you get additional features when you choose your lunar phase. So as a full moon sorcerer, you are now the best investigator. You get to shed bright light in a 10-foot radius, and additionally, you and creatures of your choice that are within that light get advantage on investigation and perception checks. So now the Inquisitive Rogue is walking around with his magnifying glass trying to suss out the situation, but then the sorcerer just comes in glowing and solves the problem.
Let me shed a little light on the situation for you, friend. I mean, as a sorcerer, you actually might not be the best at investigation or perception. Neither of these skills are your primary ability score bonus, and you don't have access to expertise. But just handing out advantage to your other party members who might be really good at those is not bad.
So in a way, you might be the Watson to your Inquisitive Rogue's
kind of fun.
Sherlock.
Yeah. The new moon gives you advantage on dexterity stealth checks. In addition, when you are in darkness, attack rolls against you have disadvantage, which is interesting because a creature with dark vision or true sight or blind sight or anything who would be able to see you in the darkness doesn't have any way to get around that.
That's, I think, the coolest thing is, if you're in darkness and you're fighting creatures that can't see in darkness, then this doesn't have any practical effect. But in almost every other situation, which happens a lot, if you're fighting a dragon and the dragon's lair is dark, the dragon has blind sight, but that doesn't matter because you're in the darkness, so it has disadvantage on attacks against you. I think that this is actually a pretty good buff to the defensive capabilities of a sorcerer.
I mean, if I was the dragon in that situation, I'm still going to hit you with the breath weapon.
Yes.
And I've got a pretty high attack bonus anyways, yeah.
And with Crescent Moon, you have resistance to necrotic and radiant damage. could be useful in the right situation.
Yep. So basically, now, depending on which phase you're sitting in, you get a bit of a passive buff, and you get that discount to the meta magic associated with the schools of magic that you're in that phase. So now at this point, I think at 14th level, if you want to spend the sorcery point to shift phase to get the buff, I think that's a fine, right? You know, obviously it's worth it, especially to shift into getting resistance to radiant or necrotic damage if you're fighting enemies with that kind of trait. And I think that beyond that, the disadvantage on attack rolls is awesome. When the investigation scenarios happens, also worth it.
Yeah, if you're in the middle of an investigation, spending a sorcery point to help everybody out, great.
Yeah.
When we reach 18th level, though, I think this is where it turns into the point where you're going to switch possibly often. At 18th level, we gain Lunar Phenomenon. Now, as a bonus action when you are within that phase, or as part of switching into the phase, you can activate a special ability associated with that moon phase. The full moon allows you to blind creatures within 30 feet of you and regain hit points. You can either regain the hit points on yourself or an ally who's nearby.
The new moon does 3d10 damage to creatures of your choice within 30 feet that fail saving throws, but then it also allows you to turn invisible.
The crescent moon allows you to teleport 60 feet, bring somebody with you, and you gain resistance to all damage. I think all three of these are actually outstanding.
Now, what's interesting about all of these is that you get to use them each once, and then after that, if you want to use that again, you have to spend 5 sorcery points. But this really incentivizes you to switch those lunar phases, because now you're getting this power to activate as part of the phase switch, plus all the buffs that you have from being in that new phase or as needed, plus the meta magic as you need. So at this point, I think, yeah, like switch when you need to switch.
I think that the teleporting from the crescent moon option is even something that I would just spend a sorcery point and switch to even outside of combat. There's so many situations where you want to blow a 4th level spell on Dimension Door to bring you and an ally over a wall or through a dangerous area. Most of the time I'm not teleporting the full 400 feet of Dimension Door. I'm really only teleporting 30 to 40 feet. So I could just spend a sorcery point, which is a much lower cost than a 4th level spell slot, and teleport 60 feet.
What's interesting about all of these is that they actually all have an interesting defensive benefit for you. So blinding your enemies can help you escape from them if you're surrounded. Damaging your enemies and turning invisible can also help you escape. And teleporting and gaining resistance to all damage can also help you escape and survive. So all of these abilities have a very cool survivability feature to them. And so I could see using them in similar but different ways, right? And so you kind of have the right way of escaping, like teleporting out of there, gaining resistance to damage, healing yourself, blinding your enemies, or killing them and whatnot. All are good ways of getting away, and so you have all of those at your fingertips for the low cost of a sorcery point and a bonus action, or 5 extra sorcery points if you need to. I think it's kind of costly to spend the 5 sorcery points again. If
the situation came up that this is going to be the moment that wins the combat encounter, maybe.
Yeah.
It should also be noted that the new moon option, which is the one that does damage and turns you invisible, also reduces creatures who fail their save speed to 0.
Right. That is really good. I think that might be worth 5 sorcery points on its own.
You can damage a bunch of creatures, reduce their speed to 0, and turn invisible.
Yeah.
If you are in a bad situation, that stops a TPK.
Yeah, that actually really could.
Spending 5 sorcery points to stop a TPK from happening, turning yourself invisible, and getting out of there with your allies.
I mean, these are the capstones. They better be good. And
yeah.
I think that this is actually some really good capstone powers overall. So, looking at this sorcerer subclass, it is the first sorcerer subclass that we've seen post-Tasha's, where we had the Aberrant Mind and the Clockwork Soul, which were a real big evolution of power for the sorcerer. So, if we look back to our ranking metrics that we use when ranking the subclasses, we previously had given the S rank to both those new sorcerer subclasses in Tasha's. where we gave A's to the Divine Soul and the Shadow Sorcerer. How does this stack up against those?
This is tough because while we were doing our ranking videos, there was an evolution of the Sorcerer, I feel.
Yes.
And so it's tough because the Sorcerers that we gave an A to keep falling a little further behind all the new Sorcerer subclasses. I think that the Lunar Sorcerer presents an option that is more powerful than most of the earlier Sorcerer subclasses, is almost on par with the Aberrant Mind and the Clockwork Soul, but I don't feel like it quite reaches those two subclasses' potential.
It's the spell list. It's the spell list. Even though you're getting 15 spells, they're not amazing spells, and you can't retrain them.
That's the big thing, is not only do the Clockwork Soul and the Aberrant Mind gain additional spell lists, they're smaller spell lists, but you can train those out for any spell in those schools of magic, and you can kind of pack those spell lists with some of the best spells in the game as additional spells for Sorcerer, whereas this one's set as it is. And although there's a lot of cool features here, I'm not saying this is a bad subclass by any means.
No, it's an A+.
I would give it an A+. Yeah.
I just don't think it's quite as crazy S tier as the other ones. Like, it feels better than everything except the Tashes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that this is one of the best Sorcerer subclasses. The way that this Sorcerer subclass plays into the existing base class of the Sorcerer, the use of meta magic, the ability to cast additional spells, and all of the sort of ways that shifting your moon phase kind of just add almost additional spells. Like, the abilities all feel like you're casting additional spells. So it just feels like a very magicked up Sorcerer, which is very fitting for a Dragonlance setting.
I think that the meta magic discount can be a little eye-popping at first as well. But then when we see the restrictions, and especially the fact that Evocation and Conjuration are excluded from the possibility of getting the meta magic discount, Evocation and Conjuration being two exceptionally strong schools of magic, it really does start to narrow down the list of possibilities and how much we're going to get out of this. At the same time, Transmutation and Abjuration are possibilities. It's just that both Transmutation and Abjuration tend to be the ones that we're using Twin Spell and stuff with. So, I mean, we are getting a couple extra sorcery points, and that's really good. But really, it kind of boils down to, hey, have a number of sorcery points extra equal to your proficiency bonus.
Now, as we get into how Monty and I would build the Lunar Soul Sorcerer, I think what's interesting is as we look at the lunar phases, being able to shift between them, the different schools of magic that they're associated with, and the meta magic options that we would get a discount on, it actually presents something that I think is a little different than how I would normally build a sorcerer. Most of the same rules apply here. If you've watched our other How to Build a Sorcerer videos, you probably know our favorite spells, our favorite feats, all of that. But I think what we should focus on for how we would build it is what's different about focusing on the lunar phases. And I think you actually end up with a little bit more of a utility caster than you do a blaster with the Lunar Sorcerer. With your 15 additional spells, a lot of which are utility based, and being able to get discounts on things like Divination and Illusion and Transmutation. There are some damage-dealing spells we can sneak in here, but we really want to play with those meta magic discounts.
As we mentioned earlier, the elephant in the room is off the table. We can't get free Empowered Spell on Fireball. There's no Evocation option, and there's nothing like getting any sort of Conjuration options either out of this. So we can't even get a cheap Vortex Warp or Dimension Door out of this either. But there are still some Empowered Spell options, just not that many. You could empower Ray of Sickness or Erupting Earth for free, maybe Blight, although I don't really know if all these are the best picks.
I think that when you get to higher levels, though, there are some sneaky spells that you think might be Evocation, but they're not. Synaptic Static is not an Evocation spell and could benefit greatly from Empowered Spell.
Yeah, it's enchantment, so...
Then we get Circle of Death, also could benefit from Empowered Spell, But then there's this list of, I think, really good options here. We get Disintegrate, Mental Prison, Finger of Death, Psychic Scream, all at pretty high levels, all of which could be empowered or fit into being able to be used with any of the other meta magics that work with them.
So I think this is a case of don't take Empowered Spell right away with the Lunar Soul Sorcerer. Maybe take it at higher levels. I mean, it's still worth empowering a Fireball, though. Yeah. So you still might take Empower Spell, you're just not going to get the benefit from it with your subclass feature. I think another interesting option that could apply for many of the schools of magic, such as Abjuration and Necromancy and Transmutation, is Heightened Spell. Casting Heightened Spell to impose disadvantage on a banishment or a hold monster is pretty good. And 3 sorcery points is a little expensive, but 2 sorcery points, it becomes a more enticing proposition. So I think Heightened Spell as a higher level option when you do have things like banishment and hold monster on the table might be worthwhile.
It's weird that 3 is kind of the threshold here. I feel like every time I have to spend 3 sorcery points, I go, oh, is it worth it? Yeah. But if it's 2 or 1, I'm great. Yeah. And with this, if it's 0...
Yep, and illusion and enchantment spells, we can be in the phase of the moon to get subtle illusion and enchantment spells for free.
Subtle suggestion.
We got subtle spell on detect thoughts, which is divination, but still pretty good. We got subtle spell on illusion, like any sort of illusion-based spell that we want. We could have subtle spell on hypnotic pattern. There's a tricky thing where if you subtle spell on counterspell, someone else who wants to counterspell your counterspell can't see you casting counterspell, so they can't counterspell your counterspell because there were no components associated with it.
I mean, let's just talk about the fact that you can't counterspell a subtle spell.
Yeah.
So the fact that you can subtle spell for free almost means that as long as you're casting a spell from the school of magic that you are currently associated with, I would almost just say, I'm going to subtle spell it.
Yeah, just for 0, just so that if you know that you're fighting another caster, takes the risk of getting counterspell off the table. Actually, that's a pretty sweet benefit, right? Yeah. And a reason to have it in combat for almost anything. As we go into things like Twin Spell is one of those meta magics that scales with cost.
Yeah.
So normally you pay a number of sorcery points equal to the level of the spell, but now we're getting that discounted by 1. So if we are twinning something like Tasha's Mind Whip, now that's only 1 sorcery point for that.
That's got to be my favorite use here, is 1 sorcery point to twin Mind Whip is better than upcasting Mind Whip.
But we could twin Banishment, once again, instead of upcasting it. We could twin Hold Person. We could twin Haste for only 2 sorcery points.
Invisibility, Fly.
Yeah, twin Fly. There's a lot of good stuff that we could just... That 1 extra discount on that normally expensive meta magic is pretty good. And then finally, for just general application, Quickened Spell for 1 sorcery point on anything is... that's awesome.
Yeah. So I think when we talk about building a Lunar Soul Sorcerer, really the only difference from other sorcerers is that I'm going to pay more attention to the schools of magic for the spells that I pick.
Yeah.
And start to think about how those play into the abilities that the Lunar Soul Sorcerer actually gets.
Yeah.
But you end up with a pretty good utility and support caster who has so many tricks to help the party out. And with the discount on being able to twin or quicken or subtle or like any meta magic really, just makes you more helpful. The fact that you can solve a situation by twinning Fly or Invisibility. You could solve a situation by using that high level ability where you damage everybody, reduce their speed to 0, you turn invisible, and then you twin Invisibility on 2 other party members, and then all of you are good. Yeah. There's a lot of really quirky and fun, non-damage dealing play to be had with this subclass.
Yeah, and I think that sitting in the phase that gives you the discount on illusion and transmutation is a pretty safe bet. I think that sitting in the phase that gives you discounts on enchantment is fine. I think necromancy, there's just not a lot of good necromancy spells on the sorcerer spell list in general.
No.
Abjuration and divination getting a discount on meta magic is probably the rarest that I would want. Well, I think that banishment and counterspell are staples for sorcerers. and it's cool to subtle your counterspell, and it's cool to twin your banishment. That's probably the rarest cases, and with divination, I think, again, subtle detect thoughts, maybe.
I do think that there's a lot of cool options, and I do like that we can sneak in spells like Disintegrate, which always baffles me that it's not an evocation spell, but it isn't, and we can use that and empower that big hit for a lot more damage. So all in all, I think that this is a great sorcerer subclass. I think that it dials up the magical feeling, which is what we want from the Dragonlance setting, and I think that it's a really powerful option to play.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's an A+ subclass. I think that if the spell list were just a little bit better, if it had Moonbeam and Fairy Fire, it would be S tier, for sure. If you could retrain the spells in the spell list, it would be broken.
It would be too powerful.
Yeah, it would be broken. But it's a strong subclass overall, and one that I think is a worthy addition to the Sorcerer's Arsenal.
So this has been a look at the Lunar Sorcerer in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you've had a look at this class or even gotten a chance to play one, let us know how it went in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider supporting the channel by following the links in the description below.
And if you want to see me play a Sorcerer subclass that keeps falling further and further down the list of awesome subclasses for the Sorcerer, you should check out our live play in the World of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more guides for character building in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you can be caught up on all of our content.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.